Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Live with Mel. This episode is brought to you by Yellow Cab Company of DC. If you're looking to avoid rideshare prices, then check out the Yellow Cab Company of DC when you are in the nation's capital. Russia has not made many friends in the past several weeks and actually the past several months. At this time, many countries are putting heavy sanctions on Russia in order to show that they do not support the war, that they do not support Russia invading Ukraine. Now, while many countries are putting sanctions in place and showing that they are not pleased with what Russia is doing and showing that they do not condone this illegal war that Russia is doing, we are seeing that Russia did issue its own list of people who are unfriendly to Russia. Now, Putin and the Kremlin did put out a list, and essentially this list is showing which countries have been unfriendly to Russia. Now, many people were surprised at the countries that were on the list. Now, the majority of the countries on the list are countries that essentially have put sanctions on Russia. So Australia, UK, EU countries, Canada, New Zealand, US are all on the list. But the tiny country of San Marino has also made the list. And many people are confused as to what the Kremlin is doing by putting tiny countries like San Marino and Liechtenstein on the list. But again, the majority of countries are countries that are putting heavy sanctions on Russia, Russian citizens, Russian banks, and other places. Now, these heavy sanctions are continuing to wreck the Russian economy. And it doesn't look like countries are going to lift the sanctions anytime soon until Russia pulls out of Ukraine or until the countries come to some type of agreement. But again, at this time, the countries are in the process of negotiating. Now, prior to today, Ukraine and Russia did meet 2 times in order to see if they could come to some type of resolution. Now, today, they are meeting a third time. Today, they are meeting again to negotiate and to see if they can come to some type of agreement. Now, we all know Russia wants several things from Ukraine, but it does not look as though Ukraine is going to agree to these terms. But the 2 countries are meeting today in order to try and deal with this situation and end the war. Now, while people are happy that the 2 nations are talking, many people believe that negotiations are dim and there's no breakthrough that's going to come from the negotiations that happen today. Now, again, while they're not releasing at this time exactly what they're talking about, we do know that Russia wants several things from Ukraine. They want Ukraine to essentially stay neutral. They do not want them joining the EU or NATO. And Ukraine wants an immediate ceasefire, and they want to have Russian troops pulled out of Ukraine. And because these 2 demands that the 2 countries have, it does not seem as though either side is going to budge. Now, we do know that Putin is adamant about Ukraine not joining NATO and not joining the EU. Essentially, Putin and the Kremlin want Ukraine to stay neutral at this time, but it looks as though Putin's endgame is to essentially reabsorb Ukraine, excuse me. Now, it's also looking as though Russia would want Ukraine to essentially say that those 2 areas those 2 eastern area where the rebel forces are, to essentially either be a part of Russia or Ukraine to essentially recognize them as a separate entity, a separate country. And it does not look as though Ukraine is willing to do that. Now, again, the 2 countries are meeting at the moment, but it does not look as though there's going to be any breakthrough, even though they're meeting. And then let's go ahead and go to the comments. So Wade says, Koch refuses to sanction Russia and is doubling down, kind of as they did when they aligned with the Nazis. Whereas the cancel culture peeps, they have finally have a real mission. Now, again, there are several countries and corporations that do not want to put sanctions on Russia at this time. While the majority of the Western world is looking to sanction Russia, while major private sector companies are cutting ties with Russia. For instance, Shell and ExxonMobil are cutting ties with Russia at the moment. They're no longer engaging in business with Russian oil. There are countries and corporations that are still doing business with Russia. Coca-Cola is one of them. And we do know that Mexico has decided to not put sanctions on Russia as well. And Mexico actually took it a step further. Mexico is even condemning the censorship of social media in Russia by major corporations such as Facebook and Google. So at this time, we are looking at a world, including corporations, where people are divided, where some companies and some people and some countries want to continue to sanction Russia, and companies and countries like Mexico and Coca-Cola do not want to put these sanctions in place. I am not going to read that one out loud, but let's go ahead and go to Joanna's comment. Joanna says, it just blows my mind how Europe and other nations are allowing this madman to kill and destroy with no consequences. Now, when we look at this situation, it's not with no consequences. At this time, I do believe Europe and the Western world are trying to keep the war contained between the two countries. Now, again, people are going back and forth in what the Western world should do. Now, it does look as though EU, or basically Western Europe, will eventually step in before the United States steps in. But again, once more countries join in, once more countries start entering into this conflict with boots on the ground, it changes the dynamic of the war. Again, the Western world, so the EU, UK, the United States, Canada, Australia are putting sanctions in place against Russia. They are providing lethal aid and financial aid to Ukraine. However, boots on the ground would change the dynamic of the war completely. Boots on the ground would change it from a war between Russia, Ukraine, to a war in Eastern Europe, to a war in all of Europe, to a global conflict. And again, I do not like saying World War III, but if the United States or any countries outside of Europe essentially step into the war, it does become World War III. And countries are trying to help Ukraine in ways that they can without causing a complete global war, which I don't think any country at this time is prepared for, especially with coming out of the pandemic. So again, many people want to see the Western world step in and have soldiers on the ground, have boots on the ground, but it completely changes the dynamic of what the war is. And that, again, is one of the main reasons. There are several other reasons as well, but one of the main reasons why the Western world has not put boots on the ground at this moment. Wade says we need to cancel Mexico too. Laugh my ass off. And I don't think we are there yet. Countries and corporations at this time have the ability to decide whether they're going to put sanctions in place. And countries do have to look at how it will also affect their economy. Now we're seeing gas prices rise tremendously across the globe, and that is because private companies have stopped doing business with Russia oil. And then Wade says Putin needs to have a drink with Bill Cosby, and then Bill will let him. Not going to finish that comment that Wade has put up. But again, there's a lot happening, and even though they're having negotiations at this time, it doesn't seem as though there's going to be any major breakthrough at the moment. Now, one of the things that people were happy to hear about over the weekend was the ceasefire. Now, again, Russia said that they were going to have a ceasefire to allow people from Ukraine to flee areas that were being heavily bombed. Now, many people across the country thought this was a good sign and that it was going to work and that people would be able to flee areas of conflicts, areas of war, areas where bombs and missiles were going off. However, the ceasefire crumbled very quickly for several reasons. Now, Ukraine has come out and said that Russia never intended to actually have a ceasefire. And during the time that they negotiated having a ceasefire, Russia continued to bomb areas. That Russia continued to attack areas and did not actually allow for the ceasefire. Now, the deputy head of President Zelensky's office came out and said, the Russian side is not holding up the ceasefire and has continued firing into Mariupol itself and its surrounding areas. Talks with the Russian Federation are ongoing regardless of the setup of the ceasefire and ensuring a safe humanitarian corridor. Now, again, they were trying to have the corridor. There were several attempts over the weekend, but again, Ukraine came out and said while Russia was going to have the ceasefire, they did continue bombing the areas, so the corridor was not a safe passage. Now, Russia did offer to have another safety corridor put in place to allow Ukrainians to leave. However, Ukraine has decided to decline that offer because they're essentially saying that it's propaganda and that Russia is not actually trying to allow a safety corridor, but instead they're saying that they're bringing in Ukrainians from Ukraine who are trying to flee and only allowing them to go to Belarus, which is Russia's ally country, or allowing them to go to Russia, essentially funneling them into quote unquote enemy territory. So it's not really a safety corridor. It's as they're saying, that it could just be propaganda to make Russia look as though it's allowing people to go to safety. But again, if you were at war with a nation and there is a safety corridor leading you to behind enemy lines, would you be keen on going? So it does not look as though the safety corridor is going to happen. But officials from both sides said even if the safety corridor does not work, they're going to continue to meet and try to negotiate like we are seeing today, like we saw this morning. And then Wade says Putin is full of shit. And that is what a lot of people are saying. And while the Western world is saying that, because I do have to correct myself there, while the Western world is saying things like Wade is saying that Putin is full of shit, in all actuality, we are now seeing that the world is becoming very divided, with certain people backing Russia and with certain countries and certain people actually being against Russia and following through and believing in the sanctions. Now, with what the media is really showing us, we are seeing the Western world really talk about what's happening. But there are countries, there are people, and even corporations who are deciding that maybe they're not necessarily against what Russia is doing, or they don't want to be involved. And this has the potential to essentially divide the nation as a whole. It has the ability to essentially tear the world in half and put us into a position where we do enter into a major global conflict. And then Wade said, yes, with weapons, I put Putin bullets in the ass from behind. Wade, I don't know if I'm able to pull up your comments anymore. Don't know when we're going to pull up your comments. Now, while most of the people have been against Russia, like I said, in the Western world, people are against Russia for the most part. Something did happen this past week, which did make many people concerned. Now, as we all know, that the Geneva Convention, there are rules put in place to dictate what could happen during war and what was deemed essentially illegal during war as well. Now, many people hold what happens in war, according to the Geneva Convention. They want to make sure that even though war is terrible, that both sides follow these guidelines in order to ensure that we are being as humane as possible during a war. And I know that sounds like an odd statement to say, but there are rules for war. And many people are concerned about what Ukraine did over the past several days. Now, according to the Geneva Convention, you're not allowed to show videos of prisoners of war. And this is for several reasons. Number one, many countries will show videos of prisoners of war and have them be coerced into saying things that they do not want to say. While does not seem as though it is the case with what Ukraine is doing with allowing the prisoners of war to come out on media, to TV, and relay the information that they want to relay, many people are saying it is a gray area and it is definitely crossing the line. Another reason why they do not want prisoners of war to be on media, to be on television, to be on social media while they're a prisoner of war is because once they return to their country of origin, they could face a lot of different punishment from the government, and also just people in general when they are on camera, especially if they're coerced or if they say anything against their home country. The rules from the Geneva Convention are put in place to ensure that even though when war is a terrible thing, that people don't go too far, that human life is still respected, that people still have dignity. And at the end of the day, we do value essentially the human life. And these rules are put in place. Now, some people who have viewed the video have stated that video needs to be seen, that people need to hear this, because again, many Russian soldiers are stating that they did not know what they were going in there for, that they were told that they were fighting, they were either doing military exercises or they were protecting Russian citizens or the rebel forces, and many did not realize that they were going in attacking civilian areas or attacking and invading Ukraine. But again, even though people are saying that these videos show a heartwarming or it needs to be heard or it gives the Russian soldiers a voice, it does go against the Geneva Convention. Now, again, people are trying to say that it's okay because of the message that they're saying, but it becomes a very, very delicate situation where it says who gets to break the rules from the Geneva Convention and who doesn't. At the end of the day, both sides need to, when engaging in war, continue to follow the rules set in place at the Geneva Convention. Because once you start pushing the boundaries of one rule, the other side will start pushing the boundaries as well. And then let's go to the comments. Let's see. Wade says, nah, he wasn't using them as war assets. He was making fun of them. There's a difference. Joanna says, he is a bully, and I believe if all the countries at the start came together and targeted this psycho, we would not be in this situation. If he was so bold to attack Ukraine the way we were witnessing, he will come after any country he wants. And I do agree that he will continue pushing west, I believe. Wade says, not only that, Ukraine is not part of the Geneva Convention, so it doesn't apply to them. If you want to apply it, make them a part of NATO. Wade also says, now that's some made up tree hugger shit. If you're not part of it, you don't get to hold them against it. Now, again, this is what I'm going to say. I'm going to respond directly to Wade. Geneva Convention. These rules were put in place to ensure that both sides that are engaging in war treat each other humanely. And the way that Putin's mind works, if he sees Ukraine doing something that could potentially seem as harmful or potentially be seen as violating Geneva Convention, whether they're a part of it or not, that will open the door for Putin and Russia to do things that are far worse and justify it with what Ukraine did. Again, you have to realize that you're dealing with someone like Putin. And Putin will take advantage of anything that is put in front of his way that he can take advantage of. And this could give him the opportunity to throw the rules that are put in place out from the Geneva Convention. Wade says, you have to sign the convention to be a part of the convention. If you don't, let them sign it. You don't get to use it against them. And again, you're entitled to your opinion. I'm going to tell you that it's a very gray area, and it's going to open the door for a lot of things for Russia to go ahead and do against Ukraine. So while they're doing it, I'm not sure if this has been state sanctioned or it's just people in media doing it. But again, If they do it, you'll see more propaganda video coming from Russia. And we don't know how Russia is going to how they're going to treat their prisoner of wars. Wade also says, personally, I think that it's an advantage for the Ukraine not to be part of it. It allows them to handle their business like the Molotov cocktails. And again, that is something that is possible. But switching really quickly, and it's going to be the last topic that we really talk about with the Ukraine-Russia conflict. Now, many people, especially in America, are upset about the gas prices. There's been a huge complaint. And again, while countries are not necessarily putting sanctions on oil in Russia, we are seeing that private companies such as Exxon and Shell are putting their own quote unquote sanctions against Russia. Essentially, they're decided that they will no longer do business with Russia oil. Now, while that is a very simplistic reason to explain why oil prices have risen, there's other factors involved as well. But essentially, the catalyst for the $5, $6, almost $7 gas prices, and I'm sure there is a place in California where gas is now $7. It was the catalyst. The war in Eastern Europe was the catalyst for this tremendous hike in gas prices. Now, as remember, during the Power Hour show, I did make a prediction that there could be a possibility that if we do enter into a global conflict, that countries in Central, South America, and the Caribbean could possibly side with Russia because, again, they're sick of U.S. interference. They want to essentially detach themselves from the United States. And if Russia does go into war against the United States, it gives them the ability to. Now, while their military may not be as sophisticated as the United States, it would give Russia the ability to put military bases in these areas surrounding the United States. And two countries that really come to the forefront of my mind is Cuba and Venezuela. Now, as we know, the United States has sanctions against Venezuela. However, the United States government has decided to have meetings with the Venezuelan government in order to see if they could reduce some of the sanctions they have on Venezuela. Now, that will open the door for a lot of things. Number one, it would reduce the risk of Russia having an ally in this hemisphere, in the Western world, so close to the United States. It would also open the door to negotiations about oil, and the United States would be able to get oil from Venezuela. Now, again, if this plan from the United States does work, I think the biggest thing, oil is a great thing. Grabbing the oil from Venezuela is a great thing if they're able to do it. However, if the talks work, if the United States and the Venezuelan government can come to some type of deal, it would allow Putin to have less allies, and we wouldn't necessarily have to worry too much about having troops or Russian military bases in that part of the country if we do get into a global conflict. So again, this entire war that we're seeing, which right now is localized to between Russia and Ukraine, has the ability of turning into a massive global conflict if things are not contained. But at the moment, this war in Eastern Europe is affecting every single country across the globe for many different reasons. And it's even affecting how the United States and Venezuela will go forward with their communications and, again, lack of sanctions. So we do have to wait and see. But I do want to say, if the United States can pull this off, if they lift the sanctions, if they allow Venezuelan oil into the United States, it could be a huge positive for America for many different reasons, including lowering the price of gas as a gas pump for American citizens, but also reducing the opportunity for Russia to have an ally in South America if we do get into a global conflict. And then let's go to the comments. Read that one already. And then Wade says, Cuba's a garbage. Jay. So not Cuba yet. Let's start with Venezuela, and then we will see if they talk to Cuba. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. My name is Mel. I come live every single Monday through Wednesday to bring you guys news happening across the globe and right here in this great nation as well. I will keep you updated with all the things that are happening in the war in Eastern Europe between Russia and Ukraine. And I will continue to keep you updated about everything else that is being affected by it, including the economy, including what countries will be joining what war at what time, and the sanctions as well. So everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. And I will see each and every single one of you bright and early tomorrow morning. Have a great day, everyone.